show story of them, the cave dwellers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where one gets loose and goes out and finds out what life is like outside the cave.
Outside the cave.
And then he comes back in and tells the others, and they kill him. Because they have no concept of what life could be like outside the cave. And I think that as Australians, we have to start being those cave dwellers, getting to the point where we're not going to kill the person for giving us the message that what we're doing at the moment is essentially wrong and not necessary.
And very expensive. Very bizarrely expensive.
It is. It's I don't know. It's so absurd. It's so absurd.
It is.
We're living in a kind of like a Dr. Zeus land. You know, with Dr. Zeus, if he was alive today, would be writing, you know, a crazy poem about Australians. Kind of, you know, him and Lunig would be the best mates at the pub, probably.
I reckon.
Yeah. So let's get on to the reason why I wanted to talk to you is because I recall we had a conversation on the phone when I first learnt of who you were. I saw you at a protest, I think, and so I wanted to.
That'd be right.
Yeah. If you've been to a protest, you've seen Victoria. And it's like dial a troop, you know, call up Victoria, and if you want someone to speak. But I spoke to you, and then we had this conversation on the phone where I said to you, like, how can we stop this from going on? And you went on quite a lot. We've done this, we've done that, I go here, I go there, it's not working. And I'm thinking, why have we got a government that's just not listening to the people? And why have we got a government that's making exactly the same mistakes that we made, that the world made in the 1930s, where we ignored the peril of people like the fascists in Europe? Why are we doing this again in our history? So we had this conversation, and you said to me, well, I'll tell you what things are like in detention centres, and you spoke to me about what things, and so I think that we need today to tell people what it's like, the arbitrariness and the stupidity and the absurdity of these places. So can you think of something that's happened to you recently in a detention centre that made you go, what? A facepalm moment.
There are so many. Sometimes it's hard to know where to begin. I mean, detention is just such a surreal place. You really enter this completely alternative reality. And I say that because it's not just that you go through security and there's a whole production and a whole process, but also when you're there, the environment is so peculiar, and there is at the same time such a banality about it as well, with staff who conceptualize themselves as being quite nice people and are so inured to the harm and suffering that they're inflicting on others, and many of them would themselves be quite offended, and are quite offended, by the idea that they're participating in a human rights abuse. So you get this really unusual psychology that goes on, and the rules and regulations that exist within detention and the detention environment become part of the defense mechanism of the staff, of the officers, where they externalize everything. Well, it's not me, I'm a really nice person, and you know, I would be a good person in another situation, but it's the rules, and the rules exist for a reason. No one can ever tell you those reasons, but the rules exist for a reason. I suppose for me, one really signature moment was when I was visiting a mother that I became quite close to her and her children. and our government had separated her and her husband. They were living in completely separate facilities, which eventually destroyed the marriage. And Mum had the experience of having male officers walk into her room. She's a Muslim woman. So she began sleeping 24/7 with her hijab on, and because male guards would walk in and out of her room. Her little girl, the youngest one, called everybody officer. I think officer was her first word.
Oh, yeah.
Her older child got in trouble and she sat on my lap one day. I was sitting cuddling her, and she put her hands on my face and she said, "Victoria, Victoria," and she looked at my face so seriously. And I said, "What?" She said, "Why did my case manager tell me that Scott Morrison is angry at my mum and dad and at me for saying freedom? My case manager said that Scott Morrison would get angry at my mummy and daddy if I didn't stop shouting freedom." She was 4.
Yeah, yeah.
And she was copying one of the other kids, a young lady in a wheelchair who used to shout freedom at the top of her voice. And when she shouted too much, the staff would call the police on her. So this kind of bullying tactics used, and it might sound kind of trivial, but when you're bombarded with that, when that's your existence, when you live locked up, and when you've got people managing every aspect of your life, you don't have to go through what the women on Nauru go through with being raped and sexually assaulted to be harmed and damaged. And I just remember these children's mother saying to me one day, they'd been in detention over 2 years by this point, and Mum said to me, I think I'm going crazy. What do you think?" And I said, "Well, what makes you think you're going crazy?" And she said, "I'll show you." And she went into her room and she got a kitchen strainer and she put it on her head and she tied a bright scarf around it. And she says, "I don't know why I do this, but sometimes I do this because it makes me feel better. Do you think that makes me crazy?" And I went, "You live in a place where they lock up children.
Yeah.
You with that on your head, not the craziest thing here."
Yeah.
And one of the guards overheard me and just gave me the dirtiest look. And this was the same guard who, when I was there talking, I had a meeting or a visit booked with another woman, and my mother friend walked past and said hello to me, and I said hello back, and the guard came screaming out of the guard station and just got right up in this mother's face and screamed at her and threatened her and said, "I will ask Victoria to leave if you talk to her again," but shouting, like I couldn't even reproduce it here because it was really confronting. And then she shouted at me and said, "If you talk to her again, you are so out of here." Now that damaged the visit I was having with a suicidal woman who was a sexual torture survivor.
God.
It damaged the mother in front of her children. And it's those kinds of daily insults and injustices and daily indignities that really over time completely undermine people's sense of self and lead to the psychological destruction that we see. On top of that, there is occasionally outward abuse, there's humiliation, there's women, that have sanitary products rationed and have to ask male guards for them. There's all of those kinds of indignities. And there's, on Nauru, of course, there's sexual assaults and sexual torture and sexual harassment.
But all the kind of usual stuff that goes on in a prison where criminals are kept.
Sure.
But we've got to bear in mind that these are people who haven't committed an actual crime in our country.
Correct. These are people who are locked up without charge or trial, perfectly ordinary
Yeah,
people.
no
People just
habeas
trying-
corpus, no nothing.
Nothing.
No due process, no
Nothing.
jury trial, no nothing. This
Nothing.
is something we have to get our heads around, that these people are innocent, and they're under the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And for all of you haters and trollers out there, you've got to understand that if you wish to have the same rights given to you, then you must allow those same rights given to these people who you suspect have done a criminal act by coming to our country. And under international law, these people would be tried in an international court, and so on the same basis as our government for doing this to them. So, you know, here's the interesting thing.